There is a precise, mathematically exact moment every single day when heaven and earth touch. It is a sacred, fleeting instant when your mind is suspended between two distinct worlds. In this brief corridor of time, you are entirely free of the accumulated terrors of yesterday, and completely unburdened by the anxious anticipations of tomorrow. I have studied this phenomenon of human consciousness for decades, and it leads to a singular conclusion that will utterly and permanently change everything you thought you knew about money, supply, and the true nature of prayer. That pivotal moment is the awakening. It is the very first span of seconds immediately after you open your eyes, before the heavy, dense physical world lays its claim on your attention, before your temporal problems take their rigid shapes, and before the ego's fear dares to raise its habitual voice. In that brief, luminous space of twilight consciousness, there is an open, unguarded door directly into the divine mind. To speak a specific, calculated word of truth in that sacred instant is not some empty religious ritual. It is not an act of blind hope. It is a precise, scientific, spiritual operation. It activates universal forces that the vast majority of humanity is completely blind to. An operation so exact in its picturing that it can begin moving tangible, physical supply into your life in less than 24 hours. What you are receiving today is not a comforting, poetic promise to make you feel better about a life of lack. It is a documented, demonstrable teaching, proven by thousands of students of truth across the globe. When we study the words of Jesus of Nazareth, we must discard the old orthodox habit of reading them as mere moral platitudes. We must approach them with a strictly scientific mind, seeking the underlying principles that work in a practical, demonstrable way in our everyday affairs. What you will discover when you strip away centuries of theological dogma will leave you astounded. The teachings of Jesus were never meant to be pretty, consoling promises for an afterlife. They are precise, practical instructions for transforming your present material existence. Every parable he told, every healing he performed, and every declarative statement he made was a masterclass in demonstrating spiritual laws that are just as exact, reliable, and immutable as the laws of physics or chemistry. One of those profound, governing laws is the law of the first thought. Men and women who consistently demonstrate prosperity in their lives share a fundamental habit that the suffering masses completely ignore. The secret to their supply is not working themselves to the bone, meticulously pinching pennies, or relying on the fleeting favors of influential people. The true secret lies in what they do with their minds in the very first moments of the day, before their feet even touch the floor. Unknowingly, they are strictly applying the exact mental principle Jesus taught in his greatest discourse, the Sermon on the Mount. Seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all these things shall be added unto you. Understand this clearly: the kingdom is not a distant geographical place in the sky. It is a state of right consciousness, and the dawn of the morning is the perfect, unobstructed gateway into that state. To understand how this operates in the physical realm, consider the demonstration of Consuelo, a woman who had spent 4 agonizing years trying to dig herself out of a suffocating mountain of debt. Like most of the world, she believed her problem was entirely material, and so she applied material solutions. She woke up early, worked relentlessly until exhaustion, and anxiously calculated her deficits every single night. Yet, despite her grueling physical efforts, every month her situation seemed to deteriorate further. The money she earned seemed to have wings. It slipped right through her fingers the moment it arrived. One afternoon, in a state of deep despair, she picked up a book on metaphysics. She opened it at random and read a sentence that struck her right in the center of her chest. The financial problem is never external. It is always and only a condition of consciousness. Something deep and ancient within her recognized this as the absolute truth. She realized she had been trying to calm the mirror to change her reflection. Consuelo immediately ceased her anxious striving and began to apply the morning prayer of awakening. She didn't force a change in her employment. She didn't beg the bank for another loan. She didn't seek out a single external solution. She simply, radically changed what she did in the first 30 seconds of her morning. She declared the truth of God's abundant nature with genuine, quiet conviction before her old fears could wake up. On the 8th day of this disciplined mental practice, the demonstration materialized. She received a call she never could have orchestrated. A distant relative she hadn't seen in years was suddenly compelled to repay a long-forgotten loan. Money Consuelo had completely written off. It was the exact, precise sum she needed to cover her most urgent, crushing debt. Let me be perfectly clear, this is not magic, and it is most certainly not chance. It is the natural, scientific, inevitable result of aligning your conscious mind with the infinite source of supply that God is. When your first thought upon waking is a thought of lack, worrying about bills, dreading the workday, you instantly program your subconscious mind to perceive, accept, and attract limitation all day long. You set the mental equivalent of poverty. But when your first conscious act is a bold declaration of spiritual truth, something profound reorganizes within your deep mind. Your attention stops hunting for disasters and begins detecting divine opportunities. Your energy stops contracting in terror and begins to expand to meet the abundance that already surrounds you. This brings us to the fundamental difference between orthodox religion and true metaphysics. Scientific prayer is radically different from what the world generally understands prayer to be. It is not begging a distant, moody, judgmental deity who needs to be persuaded or bargained with to help you. It is much more intimate, infinitely more powerful, and remarkably immediate. Imagine, if you will, a mighty, rushing river of pure, crystalline water representing divine abundance. That river never stops flowing, it never runs dry, it never rations its supply, and it never discriminates between the worthy and the unworthy. It is the very nature of the river to flow. The problem you are facing is not that the river refuses to reach you. The problem is that you, through years of negative thinking, fear, and race consciousness, have built a massive, impenetrable dam of limiting beliefs that prevents the water from entering your experience. Scientific prayer does not arrogantly attempt to command the river to flow harder. It simply does the work of demolishing the dam. It systematically dissolves the rigid beliefs of lack, the inherited memories of scarcity, and the paralyzing fears that block the entrance of divine supply. Once the wall of your own false beliefs falls, the river of abundance rushes into your affairs perfectly and naturally. In the city of Emmet, a man named Ezekiel owned a modest carpentry business that, for 5 grueling years, barely managed to sustain his family. Ezekiel was highly skilled, exceptionally hardworking, and fundamentally honest. His clients were always deeply satisfied with his craftsmanship. Yet his income fluctuated in a maddening, unpredictable manner, and the lean, anxious months vastly outnumbered the prosperous ones. An acquaintance eventually introduced him to this exact spiritual law and the specific practice of the awakening prayer. Ezekiel listened with deep skepticism. He was a highly practical man, possessing calloused hands and concrete, literal thinking. To him, spiritual things seemed mildly interesting, but entirely disconnected from the harsh, daily reality of his dusty workshop and his mounting debts. However, driven by sheer necessity, he decided to put the principle to the test. He realized he had very little to lose by experimenting. For 14 consecutive days, in that fleeting, quiet window before rising from his bed, before checking his phone, before his conscious mind could construct the heavy list of pending work and financial obligations, he closed his eyes. He pronounced the declarative prayer, focusing his entire mind on the spiritual truth he was speaking. On the 10th day, a prominent city architect contacted him entirely out of nowhere to quote the complete custom woodwork for a massive new residential building. It was the largest single contract Ezekiel had received in his entire life. The advance payment alone tripled his previous annual income. Nothing in the external economy had changed. His tools were the same, his wood was the same, his location was the same. Only his internal consciousness at the break of dawn had been altered. I have documented a distinct pattern that repeats itself constantly among students of true metaphysics. When you first begin to practice the prayer of awakening, the initial demonstrations are not always massive, life-altering windfalls of cash. Frequently, they arrive first as small, yet absolutely unmistakable signals that something fundamental in your environment has shifted. You might find a forgotten banknote in a winter coat you haven't worn in months. A necessary utility bill might arrive inexplicably lower than you calculated. You might receive a spontaneous, unadvertised discount on a crucial purchase, or an old, forgotten debt might be spontaneously forgiven by a friend. I call these phenomena confirmations of alignment, and I teach my students to receive them with intense, deliberate gratitude. This gratitude is not superficial spiritual courtesy. It is the literal, energetic fuel for the entire process. Every single time you receive a small confirmation with deep, felt gratitude, you are sending a forceful, undeniable command to your subconscious mind. This path works. This channel is open. More good is welcome here. The subconscious mind responds perfectly by expanding that channel. The fatal error that the vast majority of humanity makes is to violently ignore or actively despise these small signals, brushing them off as mere coincidence because they consider them insignificant. I must warn you, whoever despises the small confirmations permanently closes the door to the grand manifestations. True abundance always arrives first as a gentle whisper before it arrives as a bold declaration. Consider Rebecca, an accountant who had spent 2 agonizing years searching for better employment without a shred of success. She diligently sent applications, attended interviews, and constantly updated her resume. But the result was always a polite rejection or crushing silence. Rebecca was beginning to internalize this, secretly believing she was fundamentally insufficient. When she was introduced to the concept of prosperity consciousness, she recognized an uncomfortable truth every single morning. She woke up with the exact same automated thought. Just another day of searching and failing. That dismal thought was her actual prayer, even though she would never have called it that. She began to replace it. Each dawn, before that automatic thought could seize control of her mind, she declared that divine intelligence was guiding her to the exact place where her talents were recognized and abundantly compensated. On the 16th day, a firm she had applied to 6 months prior suddenly called her. The position offered double her previous salary with superior benefits. Rebecca finally understood she hadn't changed her resume, she had changed her consciousness, and consciousness changes absolutely everything external. The metaphysical treatment is the most powerful surgical tool you can employ for urgent financial situations. It is not ordinary prayer. It is a highly structured spiritual process that dissolves blocks in consciousness with absolute precision, and it must begin at the moment of waking. Before uttering a single word about your financial problem, you must establish in your mind with absolute clarity who and what God is. You must permanently discard the distant, moody, judgmental deity of your childhood. You must recognize the divine as infinite presence, absolute good, and the inexhaustible, omnipresent source of all perfect provision. You must recognize that between you and that infinite presence there is no real separation. The feeling of being separated from God is the root cause of all poverty and disease. When you truly recognize that you live, move, and have your being within that infinite presence, the concept of lack loses its intellectual foundation and begins to dissolve. With recognition and unification firmly established, you now pronounce the spiritual truth regarding your financial affairs. You do not state this as a desperate future wish, but as a solid present reality. The perfect abundance of God is manifesting perfectly in my life right now, and every channel of supply is open and flowing freely to me in this moment. After declaring the spiritual truth, you must completely release the result. You must not monitor the universe. Do not calculate how the money will arrive, and do not anxiously search for signs that it worked. Simply trust and let go. This is the hardest step for the human ego because it completely contradicts our animal survival instincts. But anxiety interrupts the flow. If you plant a seed in the earth and dig it up every single hour to check if it has sprouted, you will kill the seed. It requires darkness, stillness, and total trust to germinate. Your spiritual declaration requires you to step out of the way so divine forces can organize the manifestation without the static interference of your anxious ego. You must move through the remainder of your day not with the passive, hopeful gratitude of waiting, but with the vibrant, dynamic gratitude of someone who has already received. You give thanks for the abundance that is on its way with the exact same absolute certainty as you would give thanks for money already resting heavily in your physical hands. Scientific prayer at the awakening does much more than attract sudden money. It fundamentally and permanently alters the way your mind perceives physical reality throughout the day. A mind that begins its day anchored in lack literally filters reality to confirm its own belief in scarcity. It sees only towering obstacles, closed doors, rejections, and limitations. The opportunities are physically present, but the mind cannot register them because they do not fit the established mental map. When your consciousness is perfectly tuned to abundance at the crack of dawn, the exact opposite occurs. You begin to overhear conversations you would have previously ignored. You make intuitive connections you previously missed. You recognize doors as slightly ajar that you previously swore were locked tight. The external, physical world has not changed an inch. You have simply changed the internal lens through which you observe it. And changing that lens changes absolutely everything you see, and absolutely everything you are capable of receiving.